just hold it like this. Okay, so I'm going to pass around the mic and we're going to have reporting out now. Which station would like to start? So delighted to hear such engaging conversations. Okay, maybe we'll start with the programming group. And those of you that are on the webcast, if you would like to tweet in, at the moment we'll be going through the programming, the implications of the redesigned curriculum on programming.
Hello. So so our group was talking about programming, and so many different things came up in our discussion. We got 2 pages full of different things we were talking about. One of the key ideas that came up is that in the public library, we need to be supporting teachers in their way of learning. One of the first things that came up, it's one of the basics of public library service when we deal with schools and talking about giving tours, for example, when kids come in to do tours in the libraries, and how do we change these, and maybe splitting the way that we program and how we support teachers in their different approaches. Another thing we talked about is talking to parents and connecting with parents. That may change in how we communicate the relevance of the public library to parents within this new curriculum change. Another thing we talked about is how we can actively connect to the BC curriculum by possibly offering more creative and interactive programs. We talked about the importance of groups in our libraries. For example, there was a tween advisory group or the teen advisory council, and stressing their importance and helping these kids develop leadership, their passions and developing their interests, being more explicit about learning, using words and the language within the curriculum and bringing that to our programs, tying that in more. And also, as librarians, we have access to great resources, we have access to facilitators as well, and perhaps one thing we can do is connect teachers with the facilitators and instructors that we know about, and helping teachers in the school system connect with the facilitators we already know about. And one other thing that came up is emphasizing a longer term focus in the groups that we have in the libraries and the programs that we do. For example, going back to the teen advisory group, not just having groups of children come in for shorter periods of time, but watching them, I guess, grow and develop over a longer period of time rather than just like a month of programming here or a month there. So on to page 2. Okay. How do we transform our already existing programs? One thing we talked about, because we're right in the midst of it, is our summer reading club, which is a huge part of public library work. So we talked about positioning ourselves to align more with the curriculum and how we present summer reading club, having children and teens having more say in our collection, what they would like to see in the collection and what we're missing, going back to points of developing children's and teens' passions, and emphasizing in our programming the strengths of our children, as opposed to, when parents are concerned that their child in a story time, for example, might not be what they think is, active in story time, but emphasizing that all the kids that we do see in the libraries have different strengths. One thing we talked about as well, and for the younger kids in story times, like our preschool baby tales or our toddler story times, bringing in language from the new curriculum to present key concepts and ideas, such as mentioning at the start of a story time that we are, we're learning, we're trying to connect more with the curriculum, and we're trying to prepare kids before they start school. And a last thing, there were just two ideas that came up. These are different programs that I don't know if you guys wanted to speak to these, a Genius Hour and then Raspberry Pi, and how they're already sort of transforming how programs are looking in libraries.
I think Genius Hour was really just an example from my children's school. Thank you. Where for an hour every Friday, children in the classroom get to learn anywhere, anytime, anyhow on any topic. So if they're interested in samurai or crochet or whatever that they're interested in, they get to do a deep dive in that and just how we would tie that back to an opportunity like that in public library.
Thank you. And I am talking about the program we've been offering for just over, I think, about 2 years now, the Raspberry Pi coding program, the West Van Library, and how the teaching is very interactive with the kids. They're often teaching each other. We'll go through a couple of things that maybe are new to some of the kids, and then they're free to work on it on their own in pairs, and then they have the chance to discover and explore and create, and they have the chance to see what everyone else and learn from there. So it's quite interactive and exploratory, and there's no set pattern of learning. It's just wide open, and the sky's the limits. So it's pretty cool.
So
And that
thank you.
concludes programming.
Would anyone like to add anything else that popped into their heads around programming? All right, let's move over to the reference info desk.
Anyone speak? Oh, gosh. Okay. Okay, so for reference and info desk, I guess we started off just talking about what we're seeing already in the different libraries that we represent. So across the board, we all seem to feel there's an increase in demand already for reference and info desk services, and that we're seeing the types of questions are changing. So for instance, just before someone might come in and you would have many questions for the same types of information, books on bears, let's say. And now we're seeing that there may be questions for, maybe a whole class is learning about bears, but a specific need for perhaps more local information about bears. So one student may be exploring things that we might not have available in a book. So we talked about that would affect libraries, the qualifications for library staff. There might be increased needs for reference and information service training, because we might be looking at sort of more in-depth reference interviews to sort of have the discussions about what it actually is the children are needing information on. We also talked about there may be a greater demand for teaching information literacy. So, some of the good old-fashioned skills, how to use an index or, catalog searching, just some basic things like that so that we can enable those learners to do their own independent searches. And that kind of led into us also supporting more self-directed learning. So I think that sort of aligns with where the new curriculum is also going. So that, teaching information literacy, teaching children how to use the library, and we discussed that actually in relation to perhaps librarians working with, some teachers or some schools to actually go out to schools and give sessions in, just what does your public library provide? What kind of services do we offer? I think that happens already to some extent in some libraries. And then information sharing between libraries. So we talked about how if we're all going to be experiencing some of these, changing roles, what opportunities do we have to collaborate between systems? So if we're, developing perhaps online resources to help, flush out areas of the curriculum where we're seeing new demands, should we have a platform or some way we can share that rather than duplicating effort? And further to that, also collaborating with the school districts. So we know that, teachers and schools already have some resources. They're going to be using things to support new curriculum. So, have some conversations or some sort of a role to, venue to discuss that. And we were also talking about, some of the reference services moving outside of the physical building, and then also the traditional reference model. So there would be changes for that. Providing resources. So I'm trying to remember where some of these went, because we kind of got into discussion and stopped writing points down. Well, I guess we talked as well about, there's a lot of priorities in public library service. We know we can't do all the things, so we might be having some discussions about how we can maybe address some of these changing needs with, without doing everything all at once, because we know there's finite amount of resources. So how can we best address whatever priorities are going to come out with this new change? I think that was it. Anything else?
Great, thank you. Any additional thoughts for reference and information desk? So maybe if someone could pull the collections one from behind the pillar, that would be great. And I'll just mention that Richmond Public Library tweeted in their discussion on programs, integrated subjects, STEM, teamwork, small groups, hands-on, executive functioning, and presenting to finish up. So those are some of their thoughts on programming. All right, and who would like to speak for the collections group?
I will.
Thank you.
Okay, so
I think it's the right microphone, maybe.
please can help me if I don't remember. Thanks. So we first talked about just the whole idea of how if they're not just focused on Egypt, they're doing all the different ancient civilizations, we need to have a much more wide collection as opposed to an in-depth collection. So breadth versus depth, talking a little bit about that. Yeah, so then I'm just going to skip down to here because we were talking about how we may not have the book in our collection, but then we rely more on interlibrary loan instead of having so many books on all the different things. We could use that patron-driven ILL. So some libraries already do that, some don't. I didn't realize that. So so collaboration with other libraries and even teacher librarians too, to find out what different libraries had as opposed to just having everything yourself. Talked about choosing titles that incorporate the competency, so buying books that have, we used an example of the Who Will Win books, so instead of just talking about one thing, it encourages the children to think about it and answer questions as they're reading. So yeah, the currency of books. We don't have some books that just don't exist on some of the subjects that they're looking for. So trying to figure out how to help them find the answers outside of books in other ways. Working with the teacher librarians. Creating book lists maybe to address the competencies. So what books can help my child improve their critical thinking might be a question that we get. So how do we come up with a book list to help them? Or not just a book list, but helping them find the answers. Yeah, so print collections versus online collections. So talking about, again, trying to steer them towards the online collections because we won't have everything in our print collections. Support for ESL learners. What did we say about that? Multilingual collection.
So we wondered about how we would support the ESL learners in having multilingual nonfiction on dinosaurs when it's challenging enough to have that collection in the English language. How can we support non-English speakers?
And what grades do we begin to focus on? So do we begin with the earlier years, of course, and then just having to, it'll be a long process maybe to get the whole spectrum in our collection. Supporting teachers and showing them the databases and having maybe some education around what we do have available. Collaborative ebook purchasing, so potentially with the schools and other libraries. And then we talked a little bit about the homework help pages online and the fact that they'll be changing and potentially getting rid of some of the things that are on our homework help page. Is there going to be money for a larger collection coming towards us? And then we talked mostly about nonfiction for a lot of this, but then we started talking about fiction, because we may want to find books that again address the competencies. So, for example, a grade 5 read aloud that will help my students be more creative is something that maybe a teacher will ask for, or a parent might want a book list on books that encourage creativity or critical thinking. I think that's it.
Great, thank you. So from Richmond, echoing your thoughts around supporting digital resources and the concerns around the costs of that. So any other thoughts to add? Here's one more to your collections list.
So for most school districts, they actually have a list of databases that they recommend for students. I don't know that public libraries always pay attention to that, but I think that especially if we're looking at expanding collections to support curriculum, that we should be making sure that public libraries aren't duplicating the same databases that are available through the school district. So really paying attention to that and any changes that happen to the licensing that school districts are doing to support their curriculum, just to make sure that we're making the most of the money that we have for collections, and not putting money into the same thing that's available, or have better resources in a school district that is the library is situated in.
Great suggestion, and would you please add that to the list? Thank you. All right, let's move over to space.
There were only a couple of us at this station. We only did one page, but we talked a lot about creating flexible and mobile spaces, making space for collaborative and group work, as well as promoting that in the community, both to families and students, as well as teachers. Maybe the library is a neutral place in the community where the teachers can come and talk about how they're going to change their teaching and the things that they're doing in their classrooms. There's still going to be the need for individual and quiet study spaces, and then always the balance between noisy spaces and the quiet individual spaces. Moving forward, looking at creating interactive spaces within our libraries that spark creativity. Maybe the kids will see something at the library that will inspire them to work on a project back at school. So like just giving things that are inspiring creativity and imagination and fun in the libraries that connect with these new curriculum, or the new curriculum rather. Some libraries are looking at incorporating learning into all aspects of the spaces within their libraries, so like alphabet letters within shelving, constellations on the ceiling, maps on the floor, things like that. Increasing our collaborative technology spaces, and perhaps purchasing different technology tools that can help students work together and collaboratively. Looking at our service / information / reference, whatever you call it, spaces and desks, and how we can make that inviting and fit the new curriculum. People might have more questions that the reference group was talking about, so how can we make that space inviting and like the wayfinding towards the space, how can we make the community just know that that's what it's there for? And just having staff visible, maybe removing desktop stations. And do you have any? That's it, yeah.
Okay, great. Any other additional thoughts for space? So thank you all very much. That's great group thinking. And now we just have our last hour together, and we're going to focus on some action steps. So, what can you and your library do with your local school district in supporting students and parents and caregivers in your community, and also supporting your library staff? So we want to take advantage of the expertise we have today and get a sense of what, as colleagues, is going on around our library systems and the relationships with the local school districts. So I know everyone sat down very comfortably again, but don't get too comfortable because I'm going to ask you to gather in groups again and share with each other. If you are here with colleagues, you're welcome to sit together, but I am going to encourage you to also sit with others so that you'll get that cross-sharing of experiences. So these are some questions that are intended to support your conversation. So are you currently partnering with your local school district? Who do you think needs to hear the information that's been presented today? Are there staff people or your supervisors or even your library board perhaps? And then think about if you had to pick one service area to start with, space or collections or reference or programming, where would you start and where could you make the most impact? So I think there may be prompt sheets on the tables. They're coming, and it's going to say my action step to support students learning with the redesigned curriculum is, and give you some space to think about that. So your steps don't have to be big ones. Could be a phone call, could be a meeting, or a small shift that you want to make. The goal is really just to think about what are some easy next steps that you can take in your system. At the end, we will ask you to report out. And those of you that are joining us on the webcast, this is a time that you can take to make your own notes or discuss with your colleagues. And please join us in about 20 minutes, so at about 11:45.